Hello, we'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar. We'll be talking about evolving business models for digital therapeutics. We will be just keep people a couple minutes to join, and then we'll jump right into the content today. Like, why don't we advance one page on the slides? Today, we're going to have the opportunity to be joined by an esteemed panel. We will introduce them all in a few minutes, and we'll get a chance to hear from each of them, a little bit of background about them and their companies, and also their perspectives on this evolving industry. My name is Rhett Johnson. I'll be helping to introduce the content for the day, and I'm joined by a colleague of mine, Andy Parece, who will be helping to facilitate the panel discussion here in a few minutes. We've had the good fortune of working in this industry for a while now, and have developed some points of view that we'd like to test with the panelists today, and engage in a hopefully engaging discussion. We can, as we do this today, we will have opportunity for some Q&A. So we invite you to submit those questions through the Q&A function in Zoom. We will reserve the chat function for any sort of technical difficulties that we might be having. So please just drop your questions into the Q&A, and we will try to respond to some of those later in the webinar. We advance a page. We'll do a quick introduction on the industry and some background for this discussion. We'll spend most of our time in the panel discussion with the Q&A reserved for the end. So it's been an interesting 2 to 3 years in digital therapeutics. There's certainly been some discussion around business models and some evolution of the business. We had kind of a run-up of funding and investment, with funding reaching the $50 billion point in 2021, and then a relatively sharp decline in 2023, reflecting kind of economic pressures and other factors in the market. There's certainly been some of the digital therapeutics companies that have been exploring new business models as a result, a little more emphasis on some direct-to-consumer or direct-to-employer initiatives when products have fallen short of expectations. We outlined some of these issues in an article that's highlighted there on the right, and that'll be the basis for some of the discussion today. But it's been an interesting time. There continue to be several business models kind of in play. If we could advance a page, we can start talking about some of those. There continues to be a prescription digital therapeutics, or a PDT model, that in many ways mirrors a pharmaceutical prescription model. This has been pursued notably by Click, Luminopia, and also initially by Achille and Mahana before they moved some of their products to more of an over-the-counter approach. But essentially, you develop an evidence base, you achieve regulatory clearance through the FDA, and then the product can be promoted to providers and patients to generate some demand, and importantly, secure reimbursement from third-party payers when this is deemed medically necessary, as indicated by a prescription. The evidence generated would then need to support, in an important way, the payer coverage of the product. So it does require convincing payers of the product's value, and then also generating awareness of the digital therapeutic with the HCP community. This obligatory prescription sort of requires both awareness by the doctor of the product and its features and benefits, but of course also an understanding of how it would fit into the doctor's workflow, so that they can use it in practice and monitor the patients appropriately, et cetera. So those are kind of key features of a prescription model: the need to generate a prescription, and also the expectation that the evidence base would support coverage by third-party payers. And this has been kind of a model that was pursued or early by pair, for example. And we'll talk a little bit more about how some participants in this market are reconsidering whether that might be the approach that they want to take going forward. We go forward a slide. We also have more of an employer kind of driven model whereby the therapeutic could be covered directly by an employer and included as part of a benefit platform made available to the employees. The funding then comes directly from the employer. The evidence then needs to be supporting a decision by an employer to cover it on behalf of the employees. And so the key stakeholders in this case are the employers. What do they value in a product? The patients who would benefit from the product. And this has some strengths, the ability to sort of take this directly to the employers, access a large workforce. The need for a physician prescription is obviated. There's also the potential to have a willingness to invest in some of these, particularly when there's preventative care or potential cost savings to the employer when they've got a self-funded plan, for example. There's a predictability of the revenue if you can sign up the employers and you kind of know on a per member per month basis that there's something coming in, but there's also still a need to activate the patients because just because it's available to the patient doesn't mean anybody's actually using it. So there's still kind of the patient as a key stakeholder to kind of pull some of the usage through. So that's a common model that's out there. And then if we advance a page, we also have kind of a direct-to-patient model. You can imagine patients accessing this directly through the App Store or some other distribution mechanism. And this has been pursued, for example, by Achille as they switch their focus to more of an over-the-counter business model in last year for their app for ADHD. That's was a pretty public example of the transition from more of a prescription approach to a direct-to-patient approach. This is a situation where you don't really need to convince a third-party payer of the product's value, but you also may be limited to some extent by what the patients are able and willing to pay for a product as they're making the decision they're paying for it directly. So there's some potential to address patients that are not willing or able to see a doctor and that kind of thing, but there's also some limitations on how far you can take something like this, given that you don't have the direct drive from the physician or the opportunity for physician to oversee care in the same way as if it were prescribed by a doctor. So again, all these models have their advantages and disadvantages depending on the product. Some are appropriate for some products, some for other products. And we'll be exploring those issues today a bit during the panel discussion. There is one other model, if we advance one more page, that I'd say is not mutually exclusive by any stretch with the other three, but there's also a lot of collaborations with pharmaceutical companies that happen as another funding source, either by co-development milestone payments or a co-marketing or co-promotion opportunity for some of these products, maybe as a companion, a therapeutic that might get paired with a pharmaceutical. But these kinds of collaborations have been pursued perhaps most publicly, most maybe famously by Click and its collaborations with Otsuka, with BI, most recently with Indivior. And in these cases, there's a variety of forms that they can take and opportunities for collaboration. So we'll dig into some of those as other potential revenue sources for therapeutics developers and also go-to-market models to get these products in the hands of patients. So that's just kind of a bit of background on some of the models that have been out there. If we go one page forward, we can also talk a bit about what's happened in the industry over the last few months. If you just look at that top row, in this industry, there's been a number of developments that I think affect the viability of these products and the potential success for these products and a maturing and developing market. There were some new billing codes enabling doctors to achieve some revenue as they use and monitor the products back early in 2023. We had the very notable and public pair bankruptcy news that happened in kind of the springtime, where a company that had kind of been out in front of many of these things and was early to market with some of their therapeutics, failed to generate the kind of demand that they were looking to generate, and just ran out of runway. We also saw some transitions with Achille transitioning from basically a prescription model to more of an over-the-counter model, eventually in the late part of the year, kind of leaving behind many aspects of the prescription model altogether. And some other companies had sort of similar events and news. So this is kind of the story of 2023. There's been some difficulty, but there's also tremendous opportunity associated with many of these products. The panelists can talk about their own success stories. I'll go ahead and turn the microphone over to my colleague Andy Parece, who can start to introduce the panelists, and we can get into what everybody came to hear, which is the perspectives of our panel. So, Andy.
Very good. Thanks, Rhett. Yeah, so let's get the panelists involved now. That's who everybody wants to hear from here. They're all senior executives in the industry and have years of experience here. So hoping to tap into their insights. Just looking at the timeline here, there's been lots of challenges, as Rhett pointed out here, in the last year or so, and but also a number of wins for each of the organizations that our panelists are involved with. So I'd just like to start with asking them, maybe starting with Rich, to tell us a little bit about your company, your products, your role, but also your take on the past year, both the ups and the downs, and maybe a little bit on where things are going from here.
Yeah, no, thanks, Andy, and thanks, CRA, for putting this together for all of us. Yeah, like Andy, like you said, my name's Rich DeNunzio. I lead our commercial team, the Chief Commercial Officer here at Click Therapeutics. I have responsibility for our commercial functions as well as our operational functions. If you don't know Click, we're headquartered in New York City. It's where I'm calling in from today. We've been around for about 10 years, and over that time have raised about $90 million in capital. If anybody asks me who Click is and what we do, I essentially say we're a biotech company developing digital assets. And I say that because we're developing assets that are delivering drug-like endpoints, or actually non-druggable endpoints, and our biochemistry is digital. And so we do everything in-house, just like a biotech would do. We have our own R&D functions here. We build smaller scale phase 1, phase 2 studies to prove our endpoints and the movements in our MOAs. And then we have full scale phase 3, double-blinded digital control RCT trials, also similar to what a biotech would do. We have dosed now about 3,000 patients in our studies, and then we have the ability to either self-commercialize or partner commercialization, like Rhett, you spoke about earlier, similar to a biotech as well. A little bit about our products to understand who we are. These are applications. Software is a medical device. They're used on a phone to administer, so we don't have any additional hardware on our side. Our products have 2 types of MOAs, mechanisms of actions. We have translational MOAs, so more like cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness training as an example. And then the other one we have is neuromodulatory MOAs. So these are more of the proprietary interventions that Click has to target and correct specific neural pathways. So think about up and down regulation like a drug, but without the chemicals, so we have less side effects at the end of the day. And Rhett kind of set this up. We do have multiple partners right now focused on commercialization. The partnership with Otska and major depressive disorder. Their product named Rejoin just received FDA clearance this month, actually, and they'll launch later in the summer. This is a product that highlights the neuromodulation wrapped in CBT to hit that drug endpoint without the side effects. And then we also have a partnership with Boehringer Ingelheim, BI, and 2 products in schizophrenia, 1 asset in phase 3 now that focuses on patients suffering from experiential negative symptoms of schizophrenia. So this is actually a good example of a product that actually that hopefully, we can hit, but it's an undruggable endpoint today. 3 recent failures in phase 3 studies that pharma try to put forward. So fingers crossed for a readout there. And we have a partnership, as Rhett said, with Indivior and digital drug for opioid use disorder. And we have our own asset in migraine we're putting forward. So That's us. I know, and you asked what's our views on this event, on this timeline that you have in front of us. Sure, the Marcus event surely haven't been the best for us because it impacts Click from a fundraising perspective, a business development perspective, because a lot of the companies really don't understand the nuances that we understand. So I don't think there's two ways around the events that you're showing here. They haven't been helpful for us at the end of the day. But what I can say, from my views, from Click's views, it doesn't really change our views on digital really at all. In fact, I would say it almost validates what we thought going into this is that, and Rhett, you kind of said this, if you want to be reimbursed like a drug, you got to develop, your assets like drug-like evidence, be able to execute it commercially really well. And so to us, it's more of a question of timing. So we're all in on this prescription digital therapeutic model at Click. It's not much of a choice for us because we talked a little bit about earlier, we developed software that's all, altering aspects of the brain. And so we feel a licensed clinician has to be involved here. They have to be treated within protocols under their supervision. So that said, we know there's a lot of commercial challenges we have to face, figure out. And although we're all in on PDTs, we do have to realize we are, thinking about diversification. So from a Click perspective, if you haven't heard, late last year, the FDA put out draft guidance, prescription drug use related software. And what it basically is outlining is an approach to get approval through the drug side of the FDA for software as a medical device plus the drug, if it shows the benefit above the drug alone. So we have the ability here to diversify strategically with the drug and digital combo. Think obesity drug that has digital that can show better BMIs or expand drug labels. Oncology drugs to show better rate in survival because of less drop off due to pain, depression, anxiety. So these are aspects that we're focusing on to diversify because it is a different commercial approach than if we have a drug and a digital combo. So I would say a lot of it is the same for us. Our thesis is still intact. We're developing digital drugs with drug-like evidence packages that we want to get reimbursed through payers at the end of the day. So we're going to stay true to who we are because we're a science organization and we're powered by tech, and that's what we're built on. And we're going to diversify into digital plus drug combos. So that's Click. I know it was a lot, but hopefully that got everything you wanted, Andy.
That's exactly what we're looking for background, Rich. Thanks so much. And we'll talk more about the whole evidence side of things a little bit later. So why don't we turn over to Brion with Luminopia and your experiences, Brion.
Sure. Thanks, Andy. A lot of similarities to what Rich just said. So I joined the company. I'm Brion Raymond, Chief Business Officer. I joined the company about 3.5 years ago. I have over 20 years experience in biotech and ophthalmology and oncology. And when I was approached to join Luminopia, the first thing I looked at was the quality of the evidence supporting the product. And from the outset, the team had followed a very drug-like approval process or clinical approval process. They ran phase 1 and phase 2 trials. We finished with the randomized phase 3 controlled trial that confirmed the data from the earlier trials, and then filed with the FDA for a de novo clearance in 2021, which we received at the end of 2021, and then set about how to launch this. So Luminopia treats amblyopia, which is a neurovisual disease. And our pipeline, we have a number of neurovisual diseases that we're pursuing. And with amblyopia, is a patient can be born with 20/50 in one eye, 20/20 in the other eye. And by the time they're 3 years old, that the brain, the visual pathway shuts down for that blurry eye because it's getting bad information. And that's why you see kids wearing an eye patch. And for 200 years, the eye patch has been the only treatment for these kids. 2 to 12 hours going to school with their only good eye covered and having to get through the school day with blurry vision, play sports, read from the board, etc. And so when our CEO developed Luminopia, he's a neuroscience major, loved to code, and felt that there had to be a better way to treat these kids. And in a more engaging way. And so what we developed is a product or software that allows kids to watch TV while we mask what they're seeing. So instead of an eye patch, we have a dual acting mechanism where we reduce the contrast in one eye so the brain pays attention to the weak eye. And then on top of that, we take complementary parts away from each eye to allow the brain to force the brain to fuse the two images. And the images that they're looking at are TV shows and movies. We've partnered with PBS Kids, Sesame Street, Nickelodeon, etc. And now, instead of going to school wearing an eye patch, kids can sit at home for an hour a day, watch TV while we treat their eyes inside a VR headset. And the VR headset, while it's an off-the-shelf headset, it allows us to treat each eye independently. So that's what I was handed. How to bring it to market was the big question. And what we built was a prescription process that mimics that of an eye drop. Our target audience is pediatric ophthalmology. We want them, but we know that if they're going to prescribe our product, we can't change the way that they're doing anything in their day-to-day practice. And we built a pharmacy model where the dispense, instead of a bottle of eye drops, is an access code. And then we ship the family an off-the-shelf headset for them to use. And then at the end of treatment, the physicians see the patients back on a bi-monthly basis. At the end of treatment, based on the patient's vision gains, the physician will cancel the prescription, and we simply send the family a return label, and they send the headset back to us. So the physicians don't have to worry about hardware, the parents don't have to worry about hardware, and payers certainly didn't want us giving free headsets to all the kids that are treated. So we built that model in the beginning of 2023. We tested that model on a small scale. And I'd say this is one learning from watching Parece Therapeutics, is that we've built things by necessity, not necessarily investing in all things until our assumptions were really proven out in the marketplace. So we launched with just 5 sites, 5 pediatric ophthalmologists across the country. We very rapidly got up to nearly 1,000 patients. And in just Q4 of last year, we finally added our sales force that is calling on pediatric ophthalmologists and pediatric optometrists. And we're seeing great growth since the sales force launched. But that's Luminopia in a nutshell. I'll turn it back to Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So it's sort of interesting and instructive the way you kind of stepped into it, and it's kind of been successful for you as a model since you got approval. Why don't we turn it over to Omar, talk about Dario, and then we'll get into more of the sort of business model aspects.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks, Andy, and thanks, Rhett. I'm Omar Manejwala. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm the chief medical officer for Dario Health. I want to thank you all for being here today. The attendee list looks really great, and I see some awesome familiar names there as well. Before diving into Dario, I want to say that we've looked very closely at the CRA, the Charles River model, and the way you've laid out the analysis of these business models, and we like it. I mean, I think it's an insightful, kind of sharp way of dividing and understanding the marketplace. And I know we'll talk about this more. There's no one right answer here. As digital health companies have sought to find product market fit, part of that really involves finding business model fit, and some of the famous failures have essentially failed to get there. Dario has also been around for about 10 years, and we combine a digital experience with coaching, including human coaching, and device in order to drive outcomes across a range of chronic conditions. So we're really about making durable behavior change. So forming enduring habits that improve clinical outcomes and reduce the cost of care. So we began as a direct-to-consumer entity. You mentioned direct-to-consumer. A direct-to-consumer is the fastest way to $1 million in revenue for a company like this. But B2B2C is really essential to get to that 100 million or more. And so it was really a strategic decision to begin in direct-to-consumer. But I will say that our direct-to-consumer persists in a very important way, in that we use it as an innovation laboratory to test ideas, because the primary challenge with digital therapeutics is, and I've often said this, is that if they came with a black box label, they should say, caution, you're not likely to use this product. So engagement is really the primary challenge. You're getting anybody to do anything to stick with doing it. And by consumerizing the solution and allowing consumers to teach us what they prefer and how they prefer to engage, then you can end up with a solution that feels more like Uber or Instacart or Amazon or TikTok, or the sorts of things that we naturally and organically use as part of our digital experience. So we began in diabetes. We added pre-diabetes, weight loss, hypertension. We acquired multiple MSK companies and added MSK, integrating their assets into our portfolio. We acquired a behavioral health company, Way Forward. And then, as your timeline notes, we also acquired Twill. And with that acquisition and those along the way, but especially with the Twill acquisition, we've doubled our evidence base. So now we have 3 randomized controlled trials and over 70 studies, including real world evidence. And as you pointed out in the earlier slides, we sell to a variety of channels. The employers, for sure, health plans are significant customers of Dario. And then we also have strategic partnerships with pharma, which range some of the models that you showed. So we deliver for pharma through co-development of products, through shared commercialization. One point that I want to make that wasn't on the slide was around evidence generation. So we generate evidence and we partner with them around evidence generation. And then also as companion apps. So we've got a variety of irons in the fire there as we think strategically about this. Yeah, so ultimately, Dario delivers value in the chronic conditions that are behaviorally driven, prevalent, and expensive, and a pain point for those customers. Those are conditions that not only overlap, but tend to interact with each other. Like if you have high blood pressure, diabetes, worse, that sort of thing, get depression, So these things interact with each other and make each other worse. And we're solving for these kind of three core silos, if you will, which is the point solution fatigue of employers and others having to partner with multiple solutions. Then there's the person's individual silo of having to use multiple different solutions to solve the very common co-occurring conditions. But then there's also this silo of most people tend to engage in DTX in a solo way by themselves, without the support of peers, without the support of experts. So by having these thoughtful expert and peer communities where people can benefit from each other, we take advantage of some of these behavioral techniques that have been around forever. It's the reason why group exercise classes often do better than solo, and other ways that kind of peer can get involved in and make the digital experience less lonely and less solo as well. Yeah, so that's Dario in a nutshell. Great to be here.
Thanks, Omar. So one quick note before we're going to move on to some questions is just a reminder to the audience to pitch over questions as they come up. We'll try to get to as many as we can to at the end of the discussion. We're going to move over here and talk a little bit more about specific business models. Now, each one of you have highlighted that you're all doing, I think, a lot of different things. You're collaborating with pharma. You're going kind of direct to consumer. You I think, in many situations, have experience in all of these different types of business models. But what we want to hear from each of you is about sort of one specific aspect of a business model, the pros and cons, so we can kind of isolate thoughts on that. So I guess with Click, recently there's been a lot of news around the partnerships and the success of those partnerships. So for Rich, I'd just like to see if you could describe for us sort of what both the advantages are, but what the challenges are in those partnerships.
Yeah, no, you got it. And the jury's still out because we still have to commercialize here. But maybe I'll start by just saying, we're lucky to have the partners that we have. They all have very good teams, good people, different therapy areas. And the great part about it is they all have the same vision of focusing to help patients and their population when they bring digital drugs to market. And so, we have to make sure that our goals are aligned to their goals. And so our collaborations are structured just like that. Probably many of you on the call, and I know from the CRA team, we talk about value-based agreements in pharma. When Click wins, that's when our partners win commercially. So we want to make sure that we're fully on the same page, and that helps a lot with our collaboration because we're invested in this together. So I think, Andy, to your point around what synergies are working well, I think it probably makes sense to start these therapy areas that I set up earlier with our partnership. These are therapy areas that maybe we couldn't tackle ourselves, especially in the early days of digital therapeutics, and probably especially it's a little bit more clearer now. But let's look at schizophrenia, for example. It's a tough market, right? And BI has a business unit fully focused on mental health with a great leader overseeing their business unit there. They span multiple assets, so they'll be able to garner economies of scale, leveraging existing relationships. And when you think schizophrenia, Medicaid channels, state level, government affairs, access teams, it's tough for Click to probably do when you think about other areas. I talked about migraine, different commercialization approach, different commercial channels. And so, having the ability in a partnership like BI to go in areas a little bit tougher for us helps us. And so, when we're thinking about developing a product, we also want to make sure that we have experts in those therapy areas as well to support our product development. And so we have in-house specialists on our science team has been phenomenal here, and we have in-house addiction specialists, for example. And Divya, complements us because they're adding their expertise as well. So they have a broader staff able to pull in some more real-world experiences. And so when our teams are able to jointly develop these products, hopefully the results are better combined than just one company alone. And I would also say, and you mentioned this, Rhett, earlier, pharma that is, has the ability, due to the funding, to really de-risk some of the programs that we have, especially in hard to treat populations or undruggable endpoints. So they're able to provide different or additional funding to do additional studies. So BI, for example, they're doing a long-term extension study to show durability. That takes time, that takes money, things that maybe Click couldn't do on our own, or at least maybe right now. And our MDD asset with Otsuka, right? Early fMRI studies to show early effects to support our endpoint movement, things that are harder for us to leverage by ourselves. Those are the synergies. Those are the things that move forward. I don't think there's a ton of negatives right now. There's a lot of positives overall, but of course there are challenges because likely there's no surprise. These are very large global organizations in a regulatory industry here, and there's a lot of processes in place. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing, of course, because it's protecting the companies, but it does add timelines. It adds some complexities. At Click, we wear many hats, and so we want to move quick, and we can make decisions pretty quick. What we do need to do is understand on the pharma side, we have to gain a lot of people in order to move things forward. So it does add some more time. Right. And maybe only other thing I would hit on is for us, the partner strategy is great today and where the market dynamics are, but let's figure out, where the market's going. Therapy areas, we just don't get in any therapy areas or say yes to any partnership. We said no to many partnerships actually, because it has to fit Click. So it's important to understand the partners that we have or choices that we made, whether therapy areas or partnerships for that matter. So hopefully that answered the question.
That's a great last point there too, is like we're seeing the results and success of the partnerships that you do choose to enter into, but there's probably just as many that for one reason or another, just it's not a good fit and not complementary, and the goals aren't aligned. So why don't we move over with Brion on Luminopia 1. I think from the outset has been on a prescription model track, and you appear to be kind of devoted to that and going to stick with that. What have been the ups and downs with that model? And can you tell us a little bit more about decision to sort of stay the path there?
Sure. So just a little bit more background on Luminopia. So with our treatment, if you treat the incorrect eye or the incorrect neurovisual disease, you can actually cause amblyopia. So the primary benefit of us going through the prescription model is patient safety, to make sure that the right patient is getting treated and that the correct eye is being treated. So I'd say that above all trumps why we're dedicated to the prescription model. With my background, prescription models also, there's a proven model to follow as far as launching, getting the right marketing and sales team in place, the market access team, and building a pharmacy relationship and being able to dispense through the pharmacy. The next thing is it's a finite call point. We know the physicians that are treating this disease based on claims data. We're able to get in front of those physicians and sell just like we would a new drug. We are replacing another therapy, so we're competing against the eye patch. And so again, it's a model we're familiar with and ones that easily implementable given this space that we're in. It's pediatric ophthalmology. There's only 1,500 in the US. And so we're able to reach them very efficiently. And then as Rhett mentioned earlier, having physicians prescribe your product demonstrates demand to payers and demonstrates medical necessity to payers. So while we are tied to a reimbursement model with payers, we feel that the prescription process and the uptake that we're seeing is really starting to drive the message home to payers that there is a need for our treatment and that it's being accepted by our physicians as well as the ophthalmology societies that support us. On the con side, I think at the outset, we had to figure out how to build a model that fit with a physician practice. You never want to change referral patterns, change treatment patterns, and then expect rapid uptake. So that took a while for us to both design and build our prescription and dispense model through our retail pharmacy partner. And that is also an expensive way of distributing and dispensing, paying pharmacy fees for a new product, small company. I'm sometimes jealous of Rich's pharma partners that have more resources to invest in that space. And then I'd say the final thing, and I think this will become a theme as we get through the day, is there's no benefit category for prescription digital therapeutics. We are software as a medical device. The headset, as I mentioned, is just an off-the-shelf consumer electronic that we provide and take back at the end of the treatment. And when your software is a medical device, we're often told we're not a drug. And CMS has told us multiple times we're not durable medical equipment. So where do we fit within payers? And that's one of our biggest challenges right now is, once you demonstrate the medical necessity, once you generate the clinical data, clinical evidence that a payer wants to see, it still comes back to them, and we bounce between pharma benefit and pharmacy benefit and medical benefit. And ultimately, we're getting creative now with a number of commercial payers on how to bill on the pharmacy side and crosswalk it over to the medical side. However, that takes time. It takes time for us. It takes time and resources for us, and it takes time for the payers to figure out this new model. So I would say by far the benefits in our situation outweigh the cons that we have with a prescription model.
Yeah.
And based on what we're seeing from our sales perspective and the progress we're making with payers, I think we have a clear path forward. It's just a longer slog, I would say, than potentially other models.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So this is sort of consistent with the theme we've been hearing, not just from our panelists, but from lots of clients, that it really comes down to the business model being fit for purpose and sort of aligned with what you're trying to do. In this case, a more targeted market is sort of helpful for following and being successful with that approach. I guess from Omar, again, I know you're involved in lots of different types of business approaches. The aspect we'd like to hear from you about is your work with employers.
Sure.
More, we've heard a bit about that through the news, and it'd be helpful to just understand how that works, and again, the kind of pros and cons.
Sure, absolutely. It's a great question, and I'll say that in addition to the various ideas we've laid about the importance of fit for purpose and thoughtful business model selection, and even pivoting as Achille has done when it made sense to do so. So being somewhat agile, although you have to lay your cards down, you have to play a few hands before you know where to go next. I think for us, it's also important to consider business model within the macro environment. And you had originally showed that investments have dried up a bit. Now we know that investors are targeting more efficient growth rather than growth at all costs. There's required timelines for returns that are a little different. And at the same time, at this moment in this environment, there are companies out there that are fantastic assets that are essentially on sale and for acquisition and folding. And that can also expand or diversify your business model based on the assets you're bringing in. We've seen this many times now. But with respect to and by the way, I'll just want to say this as an aside, that makes this a moment in time that's very similar to the moment when Google and Amazon were born. So digital health really has an opportunity now because of this precious moment in history where there's tremendous number of assets and it's devalued and there's opportunity for M&A here. But what I'll say with respect to the employers themselves is this requires an understanding of what employers are purchasing on, how they purchase it. For us, it's about selling what the customer wants to buy, the way they want to buy it. So we're not attempting to create new paths, which pharma can create markets through its approach, but that requires significant scale. And even those pharma that have partnered with DTX haven't built new markets efficiently yet. And I think they will. So that's a challenge. So we're really about creating a glide path and easy button. So we discovered a few things along the way, which is that employers are tired of point solutions. So we offered comprehensive solutions that cover a range of conditions. We also learned that employers were becoming more savvy and more health plan-like in their analysis of clinical and financial outcomes, more savvy, more focused on that. It used to be, provide something that people like, low friction, you're good to go. Now there's much more of a focus on financial and clinical because of their own bottom lines and what they're seeing as well. So we've seen the need to lead with that in our sales efforts with them. They want interoperability and integration. They want the ability to take for us to take and use data from the plans and the RX data as well in order to drive improved enrollment and outcomes. They're looking for measurable returns and granulated reporting on the performance of products as well. And in some ways, we entered this B2B2C about 3 years ago. At that time, 3, maybe 4 years ago, at that time, the well had been poisoned a bit by previous entrants who had made very extravagant promises to employers and others, but then weren't delivering either on engagement, which is the most common failure, and also on clinical and financial outcomes. So RFPs started to come up again in which incumbents were being removed, and they were looking for more robust evidence of efficacy and outcomes. So for us, it's really been around, and by the way, that's shifted, right? So over the last 3 years, employers have shifted what they're purchasing on, how they're purchasing, what their pain points on, and what they're focusing on. In fact, the shift has been pretty dramatic. And so as a solution, we've needed to evolve and pivot the business model and the sales approach to match that in terms of fees at risk and how we construct these contracts, value-based kinds of approaches, and alignment, and also leading with evidence around, can we enroll the majority or a significant portion of their population? Can we retain those people on? Will they like the experience and will they have improvements? I like what Rich said a lot about undruggable endpoints, and behavior change is fundamentally an undruggable. The medicines don't change your adherence or compliance or your exercise or how you show the first restore, et cetera. Digital has the ability to do these kinds of, to change what people do. And so we need to be measured on that. And ultimately, since our value derives in part from that, we need to measure ourselves on that and take credit for the value we're creating in the spaces that medications can't do.
Yes, that's really helpful, Omar. In fact, it sounds like some of the early forays in this area by others has created some baggage. And I recall you using the term sometimes to leapfrog. You've got to kind of jump ahead to sort of a whole new paradigm with them in order to make it work. And you're touching on the evidence also is just a good segue now to, we have a couple of questions that we'd like to actually, to date we've been talking and asking questions directed to individuals. We'd like you all to engage in an interactive discussion. And the first question goes to evidence generation. So, what opportunities does better evidence provide, and do they tie to, does the need for greater standards in evidence tie in with different business models? So we want to try to see if we can make that connection, and whoever wants to jump in first and give us a view to bat around, that'd be great.
I can start on the prescription side. Absolutely. I think we all run the trials. We need to get FDA approval, but that's not necessarily what the payers want to see. And sometimes the physicians have more questions than your initial pivotal trials can answer. And so, I think as a PDT company goes out and raises funds, they should consider and plan for additional trial requests. Now, the question is, what data do we need to provide for payers? We can provide a number of data, and they can always ask for more or a large amount of data. So, we've launched a registry. We're collecting real world data. I think that's one advantage of being in the PDT space. We can see a lot of the data electronically and gather that quickly and run relatively inexpensive trials. So just continue to generate data and answer all the questions that we're getting from both payers and physicians. Very, very similar to a pharmaceutical launch. Everyone wants to see durability, total duration, data like that is relatively straightforward to generate. But it takes time and obviously investment.
Yeah, Andy, I can add a little bit to that. And I think, Brian hit the nail on the head from a prescription perspective. And I think it's also kind of fit to purpose at the end of the day. When you're thinking of prescription model, you have to hit everything that Brian is saying. And unfortunately, the standards are even higher, I would say, for digital than they are for regular drugs. Because if those in market access, if a drug gets approved by the FDA through CDER, payers have to review these, right? And they're looking at endpoints. They don't have to do that with digital. And so what Brian is saying here is not only are you showing up with drug-like evidence, you're showing up with even more so, right? Asking for real-world evidence at launch. Well, drugs can't have that. How does digital have that? And so you have to think about what that looks like. And so that's where I said earlier, it is nice to have the ability to partner with pharma that's going to hit all of that coming out, and it's expensive to do. But when I say fit the purpose, if you are a company that only has, $20 million in funding, well, then this prescription model might not be the right model for you, and you might have to think about those differently. So as Rhett was, setting things up earlier and talking about the different, pathways, not pathways, are different commercial models, business models, the evidence can align to that. If you are going prescription, you're going to have to invest in the evidence. But if not, if you're going, direct to consumer, I mean, I don't know patients that are looking at, deep into the data at the end of the day, right? So you might have a $15 million peak sale revenue. Omar, you talked about hundreds of millions of dollars. It's totally different. And to my thought is that you are going to be able to match the evidence to the model that you're going to look at. And for us, and to what Brian was saying, if you have and you treat the wrong eye, that's a challenge. And so you want to build that evidence. In order to do that, go through the prescription model. So I think it's fit the purpose with the evidence and the investment that you put forth to it and aligning to your business strategy.
And I would add to that the decision about pharma partnership, because I couldn't agree more that, our partnership with Sanofi has enabled the ability to improve outcomes and data. Essentially, no digital health company can do on its own. So I agree with that. I mean, it's a massive engine. But the decision to be prescription or non-prescription is in some ways independent of that, in the sense that, there are opportunities for partnership with pharma around evidence generation outside of the PDT, which is what we've taken and generated kind of best in the industry outcomes in terms of improvements of HbA1c and reductions in costs and looking at very large, robust approaches to matching data sets that just digital health companies cannot do on their own, smaller companies cannot do on their own. So I agree that partnership can be a great way to get there. I'll say that, like, for us, as thinking about your question, Andy, the way to think about evidence generation is in terms of the buyer, as Rich mentioned. So, like, what are people buying on, and how do we differentiate or leapfrog from others in the space? So for Dario, like, our focus has been on large studies, so tens of thousands of participants, because that differentiates. Long term, because the average employee sticks around with their employer for a longer time than, say, for example, a Medicaid member might. So matching the time horizon around the duration of the study. There's a lot of DTX studies out there that are 3 months long or 6 weeks long, but employees stick around and members stick around with their plans longer than that. And so for durable outcomes, there has to be the time horizon match that matches commercially what the customers want. Replication is key, because I think you can't just have one study on something. There's a lack of trust here. And so to build that up, we have to replicate studies. Of course, peer review, that's critical. That's I think a lot of companies are conducting their own trials, and there's a real power, and we hear this from when we're winning RFPs, we hear from our partners that they're attracted to the idea that others have studied Dario's data. So, like, Dario is not an author on some of the studies that have been done on our clinical and financial outcomes, which that kind of arm's length third party adds credibility for the buyers as well. I'll add that, like, we need to be looking at actual outcomes, not putative. So there's been a lot of discussion recently around estimated cost models and putative and estimated HbA1c and other estimated variables. And I think now buyers are wanting to know, what are the actual reductions in cost? What are the actual improvements in these lab values? And then finally, I would say that, like, our solutions are impacting multiple conditions. And so capturing outcomes that are multi-condition, which you do not generally do with RX, but we have the ability to influence many things because we're going after behaviors that influence many overlapping conditions. So we need to measure and capture the value of that condition.
Hey, Omar, one quick question before we're going to move to some questions from the audience.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier the arrangement with Twill bringing some evidence capabilities. Can you just say a bit more about that and how that may affect how you're thinking about things moving forward?
Sure. Yeah. So when we came in with there's several things. So one that was really exciting about Twill was this expert and peer-led community. So this is the ability to source and have people interacting with each other in these digital communities online, which is a tremendous source of access to people and who are not necessarily enrolled in the other products and solutions. It's a great way to widen them out of the funnel because the standard approach to DTX enrollment is just, send a mail or an email and try to convince them to enroll. And then, pray. And I think that really having communities.
Social media community.
Yeah. So that's part of it as well. And so like when you bring that together, but then also Twill brings a very robust research base with multiple RCTs and a real disciplined data-driven approach to outcomes. And so, we're ingesting all of that into our overall company and picking the best of the best and running this part of this.
Sounds like a great opportunity and collaboration moving forward. So as I said, we have a number of questions. We want to just acknowledge that we've got an audience here with some interest in the topic, and I think we've picked as many as we can. We'll try to get through them. Rhett, do you want to jump in?
Sure. And Brian, you mentioned earlier the lack of a benefit category that was addressed. One of the questions that's coming in is basically how are you thinking about the payer quote unquote digital formularies? What's the value of being listed on one of those? And maybe you can comment on the extent to which it maps to a benefit category or not, as the case may be.
Yeah. Our experience with digital formularies is that they're not necessarily specific to prescription digital therapeutics. They're payers are trying to find a solution for all of the digital health apps, digital health treatments that are out there. And so I think they're still trying to figure out exactly how a digital formulary is going to work, what's in, what's out. And we've been essentially trying to stay outside the current digital formularies and get coverage based on our own clinical data as a traditional pharmaceutical. And as I mentioned, we're getting innovative or with a few payers on how to bill as an NDC or an NRC, as I heard Roche is now calling it, a national reimbursement code, since we're not supposed to be using NDC anymore. And then crosswalking that behind the scenes over to medical benefit. And the current digital formularies are not set up like that. And we think that's the best option for payers, honestly, because they can still manage us like they would a pharmaceutical, and best option for patients too, because the benefits investigations come back very quickly and we know whether patients covered or not. So we've been trying to avoid the digital formularies.
Okay. Any different perspectives or anything to add, Rich or Omar?
No, I fully agree with that too. Remember, the digital formularies, they don't have prescription products on them today. These are more opt-in formularies, fitting health and wellness. So it's a totally different type of business model, and I applaud Brian for not jumping in on them from a prescription perspective, because to his point, from a reimbursement perspective, if you work and invest in the evidence in order to go out there and you're trying to be treated like a drug, those are getting around the system. It's just a totally different approach. And so, the goal would be more to shift how software as a medical device is treated by payers, employers, or health plans with PBMs in order to get that adoption, kind of like you would see a drug versus how they're, executed today. So nice job, Brian, on the crosswalking.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
There is another question that kind of gets at the potential to integrate the product with care delivery. Essentially, the question is, have you considered a virtual clinic model like Swing Care or something like that? Anybody?
Yeah, we have, and I applaud Swing Care and Swing Therapeutics both for the model they've built, why they built it, and also the clinical trials that they've run. They've got a mound of clinical evidence supporting their new treatment. So Swing Care is specific for fibromyalgia, and that's a patient population that physicians don't love managing. Difficult to diagnose, difficult to pinpoint, not a lot of treatment options for those patients. And Swing has been able to take through quite a bit of hard work, by the way, to build clinics in 5 states to be able to take those patients off of the shoulders of the typical pain management physicians. We consider that our physicians, they want to manage their patients. They don't want to have someone else, doing the diagnosis and treatment of their patients. So it just didn't fit for our physician population. But if you have a space like fibromyalgia, I think it's a innovative model that should be considered.
I mean, from our perspective, I agree, and I think from our perspective, we believe in those partnerships. We've got a large strategic partnership with Amwell. Dario sits as a solution on their Converge platform. So as they think about virtual primary care in other areas, their providers have the ability to include Dario in their recommendations. So think of that as embedding Dario directly in virtual clinics to respond directly to the customer's query.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We're coming right up on the hour. So I think I'll go ahead and take the opportunity to thank the panelists one more time for their time today, for their expertise, and for participating in today's discussion. I believe the recordings, there's a question about the recordings. I think a recorded version of this will be posted. And so look forward to that. And otherwise, we will go ahead and I'll ask Andy, do you have any final comments or anything to conclude, or should we just say goodbye?
This is super. Thanks so much to all the panelists for making time for this and with their candid answers. I know sometimes these issues across different organizations can be lead to discussions that are a little bit off track, but we really appreciate you taking time and being very upfront on this. And I guess the last thing is we are planning to have a series of these digital webinars related to digital therapeutics and taking different vantage points. So I think our next one's going to be from the pharma perspective. That's it. Thank you again.
Very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Bye.